Well, hello. I'm excited to do the book of Ruth again. It's been a while for me, and I love stories. I love the Old Testament, and this is a wonderful little short story. We're going to spend 4 weeks, 5 weeks if you include the introduction today, in this book together, even though I won't be with you for most of it, sadly. So, just a warning, if you're listening to this with young children in the room, there are parts of this that might not be appropriate. You might want to wait to watch the video until they are not present because some of the content isn't suitable for them. Have you ever had someone in your family marry a person that just doesn't kind of fit in? Maybe it's for cultural reasons. Maybe their family dynamic was just really different and they have a really different sense of humor or a different way of coping with things. And there can be some awkwardness in a family gathering until there's a comfort level that develops with this new person who is so different, whose personality or style is so different from the rest of the group. I want to give you a little bit of background on the book of Ruth. Ruth was a girl who came and joined a community in which she was a foreigner, the odd one out. How do we fit her in? How can she be accepted? Why should she be accepted in the culture of her day? The author of Ruth is not known, but some scholars believe that it is Samuel. Samuel was a prophet and a judge in Israel. He had anointed David to be king. But there were a number of years between the anointing of David and the time that David actually ascended the throne. And it might be that Samuel wrote the book during this period of time. If it is Samuel, he would perhaps have two motives for writing this story. And you'll get a hint of it from Ruth chapter 4, verses 18 to 22. This is the genealogy of David. This then is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, Boaz the father of Obed, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David. Now the line starts with Perez. Perez was a son of Judah. Judah is one of Jacob's sons. He's the ancestor of that tribe. Judah is the tribe from which the rulers were to come, according to the blessing that Jacob gave to his son Judah in Genesis 49:10, in which he said that the scepter would not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet. This blessing is seen as a God-directed one and a promise that the kings of the nation would come from Judah. And eventually so too would their ultimate king, the Messiah. So this book ties David to the line of Judah. It established his right to be considered a king from a genealogical standpoint. The genealogy given in Ruth ends with David. It doesn't say King David, just David. And that's why some scholars place this time of writing as between the anointing of David and his ascent to the throne. Before the anointing of David, he was completely unknown to Samuel. Samuel would not have written a genealogy of an unknown shepherd boy that he knew nothing about prior to having been sent by God to anoint him. It is written, if it was written after he became king, it would have said King David instead of just David. The second thing the book does is account for the presence of this Moabite in the ancestry of the king. There's a verse in Deuteronomy 23, verse 3, that bars a Moabite or their descendants from being considered a part of the assembly of the nation till the assembly of the Lord, actually, even to the 10th generation of their descendants. And yet God is going to has chosen David, a man to be king who has a Moabite great-grandmother, just 3 generations back. How to account for this? So this story shows that Ruth did not just move to Israel, but she turned to God, became a believer in God, and that God moved in her life to bring her to this family, to put her in the genealogy not only of David, but of the Messiah. The timing of the story itself is also not super clear, but it's during a time of the judges. And we're told that at the very beginning of the book, in the days when the judges ruled. The period of the judges covers several hundred years. This was a time of great spiritual darkness and idolatry. The people would turn to idols. God would then send a nation to oppress them. They would become enslaved and they would be in distress and they would cry out to God. God would send a deliverer, a judge, who would lead them in battle and then lead them spiritually toward God until the judge died. The nation would live at peace from its enemies during the time of the judge and live in faithfulness to God until the judge died. And then after the death of the judge, they would turn again to idols. And God would again send another nation to enslave them. And this went round and round and round in the book of Judges multiple times. This was a time in which each person did what was right in their own eyes. And when people do that, the result is almost always evil. Now, there's a bit of clue of the timing given in the first few verses of Ruth. Ruth chapter 1, verse 1 and verse 6. In verse 1, it says, "In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab." Verse 6, "When she," that is the wife, Naomi, "heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, Naomi and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there." So there's a famine in Israel, but it appears there's food in Moab. And that is why this family went to Moab. Now, Moab is only 75 miles from Bethlehem. It's not a huge distance. So it seems highly unlikely that the famine was the result of some environmental condition, such as a drought, because there wouldn't be rain just 75 miles away and severe drought in Bethlehem. The entire region would have the same issue. That would be, the difference between them is like the difference between Vancouver and Chilliwack. I mean, it's really not very far. There is a possible connection to a specific time in the era of the judges, and you could read about this in Judges chapter 6. It's the story of Gideon. Israel had done evil in the eyes of the Lord, and so the Lord turned them over to the hands of the Midianites. They came during the year down to Israel, and they destroyed crops or stole the harvest. They devastated the land so that it was impoverished. There would have been famine from a lack of food, but it would have not have been famine due to a lack of rain, but rather because the Midianites were destroying or stealing the crops. We see in the early verses of Ruth that I read that the Lord had given his people food in Judah. This is what Naomi heard while she's in Moab. That would then tie to a time when Israel had turned to God through Gideon and been delivered from the hands of the Midianites. Then there would again have been food. So it's possible this story takes place in the years when Israel followed the Lord, following the defeat of Midian under the leadership of Gideon. But we're only guessing here. Now let's get a bit of background on the Moabites. Why are the Moabites so rejected? Why did God say they were not part of the congregation of Israel till the 10th generation? The Moabites are descendants of Abraham, as was Israel, so they're related in a way, but the story is a really dark one. You may remember the story of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 19. Lot, the nephew of Abraham, was living there, and God led him out of Sodom to safety before the city was destroyed with fire and brimstone. Not all of Lot's family was willing to leave, and his wife looked back as they were fleeing and was turned into a pillar of salt. So only Lot and his 2 daughters, who were unmarried and living at home, escaped. They lived in a cave for a time. Now, during this time, the 2 daughters decided that the only way that they were going to get a family was to have a child by their father. And so on 2 successive nights, they got Lot drunk, and each of them had a son by their father. One of them is Moab, and that is the ancestor of the Moabites. So their beginning is pretty dreadful. On top of that, while Israel was in the desert on their way to Canaan, there was a deliberate effort made to seduce Israel away from the Lord. And this seems to have been a joint effort of the Moabites and the Midianites. The men of Israel began to be involved sexually with the women of Moab. And due to the nature of the religion of Moab, this was also an idolatrous situation. Israel began to worship the god Baal of Peor, and the Lord grew angry with Israel. God sends a plague upon the people, which is only stopped when an Israelite man and a Midianite woman are killed by a priest, one of the sons of Aaron, during their sexual acts. Baal is the name of a number of idols of the Canaanites. It actually means Lord, and so it's applied to a number of different gods. The primary god of the Moabites was Chemosh. He is a fertility god. He was worshipped with public acts of sexuality and immorality, including female temple prostitutes, and also worshipped by the sacrifice by fire of infants. It was a barbaric and dreadful religion, but due to the sexual component, it was attractive to the Israelites. And so God barred Moabites from inclusion in the assembly of Israel in order that the nation not be contaminated by this religion. And this is how Ruth grew up in this particular culture. So what do we look for in the book of Ruth? For one thing, the foreignness of Ruth is really emphasized. She is referred to as the Moabitess often. The author wants us to remember where she came from, what she was before she turned to God. He wants us to remember she had no right to the blessings of God. This is the background against which the grace of God is displayed in her life. In seeing her foreignness, the exclusion that she would have experienced, we get to see the incredible grace that God shows to her in drawing her in. So look for ways in which God's grace to her is put on display. She is a symbol for all of us who, due to sin, have no right to expect anything from God but exclusion, but instead are shown his grace and invited in. Look at how God works behind the scenes in the book of Ruth. Nowhere does it say, and God did this, and God caused that. God is mentioned in the book, but only in conversation by the characters or what they think, where they hear about God. Their faith is evident in the mention of God, but nowhere does the narrator say God did, or God expressed, or God caused. But as we read, we can't help but see his hand behind the scenes. There is a name for this. It's the doctrine of the providential care of God. God's providence is always at work in circumstances and in unseen ways to accomplish his plans. Seeing this in Ruth's life and in Naomi's life will help us be more aware of God's providential care in our own lives. There's a strong theme of redemption in Ruth. This is the story of salvation on display in a unique kind of way. The doctrine of redemption always includes the cost or the paying of a price. There is a cost to redeem, and this story shows the act of redemption, not through blood sacrifice, but in a different form of payment. So watch how God sets out to redeem Ruth and Naomi, particularly Naomi. Naomi is a huge part of this story, as much as Ruth. In fact, some scholars have said this book would best be called the Book of Naomi. But Ruth is used as the title to show us again the inclusive grace of God. But God works things out for his child Naomi, and this is very much a part of the lessons of the book. And there are big lessons in Ruth about how God brings about blessing. We can learn lots about how he blesses in our lives and how to look for or wait for his blessing. It should increase our faith to study this book and to help us see what steps we need to take to enjoy his fruitfulness in our own lives. So there you go. a little bit of background on Ruth. For next week, please read chapter 1 and do the questions provided. See you then.